Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz Review Time. This time we are looking at BIT2 from Rob Papen Audio. We have spoken about Rob Papen before with Predator 3, which I very much liked. BIT, or BIT2 for short, it stands for Back in Time. It's a little bit of a silly name, but whatever, we will go with it, because how an instrument sounds should be more important than the name or the GUI. It's a cut down, but Rob says that they've put more emphasis into a particular area of it, which is to develop something which sounds more like a real analog synth. We'll start by just doing a little bit of preset diving. This is how it sounds. Obviously, pretty impressive. There is quite a lot of effect use here. But it still sounds really good without. There are banks of presets. There are apparently an awful lot more if you go and buy the whole thing. So some are missing here. If we just start moving some of the first ones. Again, heavy use of effect, but there's just something very, very pleasing in the sounds. It's using aftertouch. There's also this ribbon controller, which we will pay a little bit more attention to elsewhere. So you see, you can change with the ribbon controller the way the sound performs, perhaps a little bit more nicely than a mod wheel, which is obviously not assigned here. But that's a nice addition. Version 2 does mean that there's been more attention put into the arpeggiator. I'll let you know up front, I'm not going to dig heavily into the arpeggiator. I never do. I always find these kinds of things obtuse, but it does seem to do its job well. Raw sound. The reverb and delay, the effects are actually really nice. Though there's a whole pile of presets, a lot more if you get them. Rob Papen's always known for having high quality presets. Obviously you need a high quality instrument to start with, and Rob and his buddies John Ayers, Concrete people, are doing a nice job again. I guess we'll have a look at, we don't need to spend any particular amount of time, but Rob Papen has a great history. If you're not aware of him, it's worth spending some time understanding. The instruments that he's put out have generally been leaders in the industry. He's not as fashionable these days as he used to be, but he has stayed very true to what matters in instrument design, which is designing a real instrument with good synth functionality rather than over-the-top-ishness. He has done some instruments that are a little bit more okay, but they are interesting instruments in their own right. He's a master of that. Obviously, we will try to put a little bit of focus on some of the things that version 2 brings us. Okay, in its oscillators are super saw and super square waves. I'm never a big fan of those as such. I think they're a lazy way to make sounds that sound like everything else, but they are there and they have a bit more versatility than I anticipated. So both oscillators 1 and 2 have the addition of those. You can still oscillate modulator 1 to 2, so cross modulation is still there, including with the super saw, super square multi oscillators. So that's good. The arpeggiator sequencer, the option to dynamically change start step and end step number, so you can top and tail change the length of your sequence, which changes the overall pattern. And then this magic parameter that allows you to alter the played arpeggiator sequence in a musical manner. I'm not sure whether it's a musical manner as so much as a stepped manner, but it's interesting. If you're heavily into that sort of stuff, you will probably go, that's kind of cool. That's an interesting approach. But as you know from me, I'm not a big step sequencer user, but once you get your head around how to use this, I think it's a pretty fine addition to that style of things. The amp section's been expanded with multiple distortion options, and they're all per voice, which means that unlike putting this into a guitar pedal where the chord will just make everything go and really nasty, not in a cool way, just a nasty way, the drive is added individually to each voice, meaning you're pushing each voice. So it's really, while it's distortion, it's really more of an individual oscillator wave shape than what we think of as a stomp pedal. So you'll get different results. It's overall kinder. There isn't a drive in the effects, but I don't see that as a real liability because there are bazillions of ways that you can drive things. Ribbon controller we'll talk about a bit later, and they've enhanced the effects section, including a version of the RP reverb, which is, well, it's not a reverb I use, but here it is lovely. In terms of price, it's up here and currently too small for me to read, I'm sorry. We'll put a thing on it, you can have a look. When I took this, it had intro options. It's not the most expensive synth, it's not the cheapest. He has a cheaper thing, but if you're going to be serious about synthesis and you're going to pick an instrument and say, I'm going to learn this inside out, if you're not going to go with something like Predator 3, then Bit 2 is probably a very, very solid choice. The Go 2, while I've not used it, I think is a good choice, but you may be kind of just spending less to get less. This focuses very strongly on what it does. In terms of competitors, obviously it's going to find people comparing it to some of Uki's things, where he's going, you're getting a, or Diva or Repro, what have you. Different beasts. I just think they're really rather different beasts. This is more broadly charming all round, and probably once you get comfortable with how Papen does things, probably more easy to use overall. My good is that it sounds, and most importantly, feels wonderful. It's very clear in its basic architecture. Obviously, if you're a beginner, it might take a little bit more time, but whatever you look at is going to take a little bit more time. If you go to some ridiculously cut down CS01 or something like that, good luck, you'll get nothing but a few farty noises out of it. You might feel very special with yourself, but you've not got the flexibility and versatility of something like this, which is the third grade. This is surprisingly versatile, especially for what on the surface looks like a limited architecture. Sure, opening up panels gives you a little bit more architecture, but it's how well things have been thought through. Rob And I don't know what balance there is between what Rob does and what John does, but somewhere between them, Rob's got his name on the front of it. They've got a really good understanding of what's going to make a very, very workable instrument. So it's incredibly versatile. Bads, well, we should put some there. You'll see the first one I've put is in all fairness, I don't think there's anything wrong with this at all. You see, have some little quibbles like fine control, but press the shift key, that's solvable, but it's just that little bit of a slows me down when I'm turning a knob and it's just overdoing itself. But yeah, is it limited? Yes. It's not Europa, it's not Predator 3, it's not Predator 49, it's not any of those kinds of things. It is what it is, and for a relatively simple architecture synth, there is no sense of limited in this at all once you start digging in and going, what if I did this? What if I did this? The fact that you've got so much freedom in your sources, like pulling an oscillator or something like that, means that you've got, while not all of the versatility of a modular, a fair amount of the functionality of a modular without feeling weighed down by the PITA-ness of a modular. So overall, hands down, I think a really fabulous instrument, especially if looking for an analog-ish all-rounder, or the synth where you say, this is the one that I'm going to start, I'm going to marry it right out of the box, and this is going to be it. I'm not going to waste my time diluting myself with 47 synths with Pro in the name. I'm just going to do this. Then I think you're on a really, really good path. That's it. Really like the instrument. Let's dig in and start to walk through the device and what it does. Obviously, up top we've got synths, presets, the ability to test without a keyboard, some settings and what have you. You can default to an original preset, so if we've changed something and gone, oh, I don't like that, we can return it to the original preset. Help menu stuff. This always tells you what you're editing and what you're doing with it. So you've got readouts up here rather than just here, but there's also the same thing as a tooltip here. I don't think I ever worked out what Manager did. A lot of this stuff is duplicated over here. You can obviously change screen sizes and stuff as well. A lot of this is the same. The reset everything does not give you a default sound. That one was, now I have to remember where it is again, clear preset. Took me a little bit to find it. I wouldn't mind if you're encouraging people to actually make their own sounds and be real synthesists. You've got some space, put a button up here, or be clever and make it, if we click the B or something like that, that we get a blank preset. So this sets us to single oscillator. We'll just pull that down a little bit, just so we don't have the feeling that we're getting some reverb, and a sine wave. Speaking of, I'll add just a little bit of delay, just to smooth things off. You will see one of the issues that frustrates me a little bit is fine control. You do have the option for fine control, and that's by pressing Shift on your keyboard, and then it becomes quite fine. But a lot of controls, I feel like it would be nice if at least the beginning of the throw of the knob was a lot more fine. But the option is there, you'd get used to it. I just feel a bit like sometimes they're a little bit large. In terms of the oscillator, okay, obviously we have shapes. We can click the drop down and run through those shapes. We can advance this or scroll through them this way. The usual forms. Some slightly interesting ones, and they are going to be useful more for later. White noise, pink noise, a tuned noise. You can change how tuned it is. So that follows the keyboard. Double click, or I think it's control click, will reset things. So different forms of noise. The white and pink noise don't seem to have any control. They're preset, but then you've got that tuned noise. So not every choice I'd want, but very reasonable and interesting choices, especially with the tuned noise. Then we've got these multi-oscillators. Three versions thereof, squares, three versions thereof. And they come out really quite nicely. Cool, so we've got a fair amount of shapes, but not a bazillion shapes. And initially you might think, well, that doesn't offer me an awful lot. Well, there's more than you think. You've then got the symmetry knob, which will take the center of your waveform and shunt it to the left or right, depending upon which way you wobble the knobble. That gives us, and you can see here, the outcome of that. It's not necessary to see the form. You can actually do it over here as well and see what's coming out of the synth. Some people like it. I couldn't care less. But the ability to see what your shape is not a bad thing at all. Is it wasted space? Maybe, but maybe not. It's not a problem. The other one is feed. I assume this is quite similar to DX7 FM style feedback. It initially moves us into a saw type wave. So if we're a little soft here, we've essentially got a sawtooth out of a square, and if we set our timings right, we have a kind of DX7 piano. We'd need to be a little bit more finessed than what I've done there, but that's the beginnings of that. So feed then starts to add a lot of jaggies and into noise. They've put their own spin on how that works and how that smooths, because it sounds different from other synths, similar to, say, Europa's feedback goes noisy a lot faster, but the options that they've given us are very workable, very pleasant, and that applies on all of the oscillator forms, including these multiples, which is where these really start to shine. Here, that gives them a really nice buzz. Of course, we can play with symmetry. It gives us a really nice, bitey kind of sound. So before you think, gee, we haven't got much in the way of waveforms, we've got the ability with symmetry and feedback alone to get a lot of variety. So if you say, oh look, I don't love that saw waveform, turn that versus that's a nice noisy, maybe MS-20-ish kind of a sawtooth, which is going to work really well in the right situations. It's not going to sound like a Jupiter 8, but if you want something, then that's how this instrument can deliver those things without it being preset into being one sound. Some people will go, oh, but it doesn't emulate an exact instrument. It's never meant to. At least my understanding here is never meant to emulate anything in particular. It's saying, here are all the building blocks of a surprisingly versatile but surprisingly simple synth. So that's your main inside the oscillator. We've then got, let's just pull him back a little bit, this advanced thing. It's a little frustrating for me that it's on another page, but I also understand that he's only got so much real estate. And so he's going, well, okay. And this is a pretty common thing in VST to have pages, so most people won't think much of it. It's also understandable that he hides this because not everybody's going to want to get into this straight away, but not all of these are advanced features. There's just the obvious we can have an LFO for vibrato. And you can do this per voice. Cool. And that you don't need to get into Mod Matrix or anything like that to do. Everything in here is defaulted to syncing to time. Boys and girls, if you want to feel like you've got an analog, you must turn that off, because everything being synced will automatically make your synth sound like a digital instrument, because analog instruments couldn't sync to anything. They struggled to sync to themselves half the time. So we can set our rate, and this here, see how it goes from nothing to a lot very, very fast. So that's where you really need to kind of have access to your shift button, and then it becomes incredibly fine. So it's just, it's a little bit of a off, on. But you can actually assign this one LFO to several different things. We can assign it to symmetry, and so that actually adds, while not directly tonal changes, a lot to the feeling of the tone, the speaking of this oscillator. That makes a very, very interesting oscillator, which, with understanding or luck, will actually put you back into some of the early simple modulars kind of sound. So again, it spreads its palette far further than you might initially think is going to happen. That's one half of that. If we turn that off just for a moment, you've then got this envelope, again, stuck to sync to start with. Actually, no, let's not assign that to feedback. We don't want that. Because this is shared, you can very easily end up with the wrong settings. It's just an attack decay which covers release as well, and sustain. If we had our second oscillator in, which we will just for a moment here, they're really cool. That's a nice thing that is often offered in simple synths, but not with as much freedom as you have here. Like we can say, okay, let's push symmetry and feedback. Well, let's pull feedback at that point, because it gets a bit too farty in a not cool way. So we've got a lot of ability to make a sound that moves incredibly well for what's on the surface a rather simple instrument. We'll turn both of those on so you can hear the total. With a little bit of there's no such thing as a little bit with Rob's reverb. Not the kind of sound that a lot of people are looking for, but really, really interesting and great to hear out of something like this, which is easy to think on the surface is just going to give you the usual suspect sound. So definitely, if you're thinking, like, I'd like something that can do some of the usual suspects and maybe a System 100 or something like that, or MS-20 type sounds at the same time, none of this is about trying to nail that, but it gives you a massive palette just within the one oscillator, which is cool. Then we've got cross modulation. So if we bring in oscillator 2, let's just go to sine and set that. Obviously we can just do the usual things of detuning. Okay, fair enough. No dilemmas there at all. But this is interesting. We've now got phase modulation, FM, which is different from what I think it's going to do, but it's a cool flavor, and ring modulation. Note at the moment that oscillator 1 is going to filter 1. As soon as we move to the cross modulation mode, we have oscillator 2 being modulated by oscillator 1. We raise that amount here. Without that, it's that feedback that we're used to. So it's just working within itself. Now it's phase modulation. Whether his phase modulation is more strictly Casio CZ or Yamaha DX is unclear. One would think his FM is going to be more like DX, but it's not. It's more like a raw or a real FM, because a DX was never actually FM, it was always PM. But nonetheless, range of flavors available. Pretty impressive. That is pretty cool. And then of course ring modulation. If we turn our tracking off, we can have our main sine with just that little overtone of, actually that filter is on. Let's just turn to bypass. So again, we've got the ability to come up with really rather interesting sounds. Turn the tracking back on. Amount of warping is not consistent between the three, as in you can't move from one to another and get comparable results. But this is really, really nice. And of course, if we're then starting to combine that with symmetry and feedback changes, we can get some interesting, indeed, sorts of sounds. Party. And do the 12 dB. It's that nice sort of ripping cardboardy paper kind of sound that you are prone to getting out of a lot of those early modulars. Very, very cool oscillator setup. Oh, there is of course a sub oscillator, should you be turned on by such things, and also another noise source which is locked to white or pink. On the surface, not super exciting, but obviously once we get into playing filters, which we will now, this is when we start to get interesting. We can turn our filter off, we can run 6 dB high pass, low pass, 12 dB, lots of options, 18 dB, I don't know why that's there. Oh, it's just low and high pass, fair enough, but still they're not. People have got this idea that 18 dB filters are like the TB303, they never were. So we'll run through the 24 dBs. Nice high pass. Band pass. Very musical, very playable. And then we've got these through zero filters, which are supposedly more analog. And then 36 dB and some vowel. Not really very common on analog synthesis at all. These are quite a digital sort of a thing. But bearing in mind that analog and digital coexisted for easily 10 years, there were things like this happening. I can't think of exact synths that were doing it. Obviously, there were some early digital synths that were definitely doing these sorts of things, but you can think in terms of, say, sort of microwavey kinds of things that would be combining a little from column A, a little from column B. Initially, you might feel like you just get nasty results from them. Fair enough, but they are interesting voices in their own rights. So that's adding another ring modulator with your frequency here. Actually, no, your frequency here and your mix here. So that's pretty interesting. Amp mod being that it's LFOing the modulation of the level really fast. Great for nasty. And the 12 dB filters, let's go to there. They're Papen style filter, but they're nice. How analog they are, don't know, don't care. They sound good. You can see modulation from sources here. And you've got all the functionality that you need for standard work right here. So obviously cutoff and resonance, envelope, which we can assign to positive or negative. That's great. You can sync it to time, but again, why? You can assign your filter to the mod wheel. Or the other way around, in this case. All right there. You can assign it to the LFO. So there's a general all-purpose LFO, which is this hardwire here. Assign your envelope depth to velocity. Now it's not velocity scaling of this, it's just adding to here from the first place. And then key tracking, meaning that if we're sitting, say, here, we get a bit dulled up top, which can be good. But if you want the sweetness of your, say, string sound or the movement, then we can assign up to 100% of perfect filter tracking, which means it'll get a bit dull down here. And that, I don't know how it would compare to if we did that on some mythical analog synthesizer, but it feels really very cool as a process. There's obviously a filter 2, which is, by all intents and purposes, the same. You can then choose how they behave with each other. We could just say, okay, I'm going to put a high-pass filter on here because I only want so much of my, let's say we use a saw as a... Cool, so we've got all the same kind of functionality there, but then we can choose how they work. Serial being that it goes through filter 1, goes to filter 2. That's the easy one. We can split the oscillators, in which case they're actually parallel, but it's easier to say. So oscillator 1 is going to filter 1, oscillator 2 is going to filter 2, and then they glue the signals back together as we go into the amp section. That allows you to pan. It's a bit kooky, especially in headphones. But again, those sorts of things were done in the really early modular years. And then you can split noise. So our oscillators are going to here, and our noise is going to here. Let's just go with a more aggressive type. Let's go high pass. So a lot of flexibility in how this works, and again we can do creative stuff. It's not going to be useful in a lot of situations, but sometimes it will. So it's nicely thought through in terms of how much we've got for a relatively small footprint. Then obviously we get to the amplifier. There's a little bit happening in here, and the new modes are the distortions. Let's just simplify this patch. I'll just get rid of oscillator 2 and bypass that one. Right, we've got the ability to add these distortions. Now remember, this applies to, let's just tidy our and that's per voice. So where that should be just unlistenably gawked up, it still works. So it's bit reducing each individual voice before they're glued together. So I'm not sure whether it's doing it post filter or just at the oscillator, but nonetheless it's interesting. Again, this is really a wave shaper, so it adds to your ability to change each oscillator form. You see that sort of 90s distorted 303 digital kind of thing. Fold back, cheap pedal, limiting, just should be hard top. It doesn't seem to show the change here. Overdrive. Let's just power. I haven't read what it's just a form of a shape of distortion. So it's another kind of bit crushing sort of thing. Saturation sort of dirtifies each part of the wave. I think this is happening after the filter. Be nice to have a little switch to put it here or there, but so be it. Nasty. But we expect that kind of stuff. So a little bit of overdrive. We can apply our LFO here. Remember here we had the ability to oscillate the volume level. So if we turn all those features back on, we've now got a really very complex sound. Velocity, that is modifying the volume, so we can set our overall output level. It stays the same regardless, or becomes velocity dependent. Okay, nice. It's all built in here. You don't have to go looking for it. Attack, decay, sustain, release. Attack time goes out to 16.38 seconds. Not the longest time, but not problematic per se. It's not going to be everybody's idea of the perfect pad machine, but I've got plenty of instruments with similar sort of thing. Definitely versatile and interesting. Let's turn that off, see what's happening here. Cool sound. Pop on the obligatory. Really nice. We've got elements of that beautiful Jupiter 8 kind of sound, but some other kind of going on in there as well. So really cool. And related to this, obviously, our play modes. We've got Poly. MPE will respond to MPE. I don't have an MPE surface, but I will assume that it works because Papen's never a fool. Monophonic mode. Mono high. So if I play a lower key, it ignores me. Now when I play a higher key, it'll take that. Still ignoring the lower key until... So it's an older way, which can make sense in a certain situation that you want to emphasize either the higher or the lower key. Legato. Meaning that so long as the keys are discontiguous in their pressing, as in space, then it will operate the envelopes again. But if one note is held as the other goes down, legato mode, great for soloing. And again, your high-low modes and then the up mode, which we'll look at a little bit in a while. There is portamento. Portamento mode, okay, we've got the on-off switch. It's one of those things. It's probably a purpose to have it, but why not just have it set to having one of them on, so when I turn the knob... Constant rate and constant time are different. In some situations you want a constant rate, which can mean that the slide is a long time over, or a constant time where the slide, that takes a long time, but that's kind of instant. Constant time meaning that it always takes the same time to slide from there to there as it does from here to there. Depends on which suits what you're doing. I think the portamento time overall could extend a bit, but there's nothing wrong with it. It has its own charms. Held rate and held time, that I didn't fully get, but they seem to be based upon the initial note. So if you let that initial note go, it seems to ping and spring up to where you're going. Not one I've encountered before, but interesting. Unison. We've got the usual let's go to poly mode. I personally am rather tired of hearing that on absolutely everything. It's like the lazy man way of doing things rather than working on the beauty of your composition, but they are there. There are then... Oh, that's interesting. Need to RTFM on exactly what that's doing, but it's adding a different sound. That seems to be working a major chord. Could be a nightmare for composing, but a fifth, suspended fourth. Again, that can be a real nightmare for merging with everybody else, but it is interesting that these things are here. And then there's just a single button, analog drift on or off. It says amount, but there's no amounting here. I think they borrowed that from somewhere else where you may have had an amount knob. It's on or off. Exact difference, I don't know. Obviously impossible to tell with that. On. Do get the feeling that there's just a little bit more depth probably in feel than an obvious movement. We've got a lot of movement here, so it's a bit hard to say. Bender up and down, lock play. Oh, I can't remember what that's about. It really not kind of my cup of meat. Next. We've done those. Effects. We've had a quick dip into these existing. We can obviously turn them all on or off here. Chorus. It's a nice chorus. It has its own sound and feel and style. It seems to be tied to stereo, which is often an annoyance I have, but bearing in mind it's a on-board thing and therefore limited, I can't bitch because it sounds good. It adds nicely to the sound. You've got a flanger or a phaser. It's a little bit... You've got to click on these things in such a way. It's just very VST, but nonetheless you have the flanger you can turn on. It does sound pretty good. It really does, especially for a built-in flanger. I prefer the default was 50-50, but so be it. Pan really being stereo spread. At 50 milliseconds, which is huge for a flanger. Normally they're about sort of 12 or 15. Interesting, but potentially limits your ability in the area, which is really where you want your flangers to get interesting, but that's where the shift key comes in. Only one side of feedback. Width being depth. Pretty cool. I've heard far worse flangers than that. A phaser. only either or the phaser or flanger. I have to confirm with the RTFM, but it appears it's an either or, which is sort of a shame. Personally, I'd like to have the option of phaser first, and then we could put, because phaser into chorus sounds great in my mind. Same with phaser into flanger and chorus or something like that. But they are inbuilt on a simple instrument, and what they deliver in the right situation is really, really good. Normally I'm just like spit on those, but Rob, John do nice work. We've got these delays. Oh, got to turn that on. Yes, you can sync it. But again, why would you do that if you're going like I want to sound or feel analog? Analog and time syncing are not, or BPM syncing are not a thing. Notice what I noticed fairly quickly? There's no modulation. However, you can nick some modulation. We'll turn these off for the moment. Doesn't seem to be a simple way to kill those off. Maybe there is, but I'm not aware of it. Digging for sources is a little complex, but they allow you to access these LFOs hidden under here and these as well. So you can access quite a few things, and the filter envelopes as well. So quite a few things, including output. Okay. All right, pitch LFO. It does take a little bit to find what's where. Now we want to go to delay. Delay fine length. If we go length. So that is a bit fast. It is a nice delay unit, full stop. Being an onboard, lovely. And then into the reverb. So you can run delay and reverb together, but not phaser and flanger. I'd set that sort of fairly small. Let's turn the pre down. That spitting is to be expected because we're asking it to recalculate on the fly. Oh, quite a nice reverb, especially for on board. Not bad for a sort of cheapy synth that appears very limited on the surface. There is a lot in here that's very, very likable. We'll turn those effects off. They're definitely probably a little overdone then, but if you're looking for rich, full, you definitely can do that. Now, we've touched on this modulation matrix. Obviously, we've got to find our source. It will take a little bit getting used to where your sources are. But unlike a lot of others similar to this sort of thing, they'll give you quite a limited number of sources. This gives quite a lot of sources, including some unexpected ones, like the output of a particular oscillator, meaning that you can be sort of FM rating, audio rating things. It can get nasty, but that's probably what you're after. So sources are good, destinations, again, you just kind of got to get used to where they are, but they are, oh, hello, global. You can actually control analog drift from somewhere else. I hadn't noticed that before. Interesting thinking, Robbo. So you can control a lot of things, including unison. So there's a lot more control of this that you don't see on the panel that's accessible through your mod matrix, which has 16 slots. Not a lot, but 16 is not terrible. They are only single source destination with no modifier per se. But was there something in... Yeah, so you can use one of your slots to modify another slot. So let's say we put pitch LFO to pitch for vibrato, and then said I wanted to control that with the wheel. Whether that's a wise course in this situation, because I think there are probably better ways hard-coded on the front panel, but that's doable. So that is pretty cool. We've got LFOs, which are the obvious ones, and then you can seem to pick from any of these other modulation things which we talked about, and then of course the arpeggiator and the ribbon controller. The arpeggiator has a free lane which allows you to set values, and you can use those values over there in the mod thing. In other words, your ARP is a step sequencer that can output values. Let's say you assign them to the filters. It goes bleep, bleep, bloop, bleep, 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 bleep. Not random, but a preset set of values. You can make them curvy, not curvy, whatever you want to do. Nice addition. This ribbon controller, let's mod source. Where is ribbon? MIDI mod source, that's MIDI stuff. Kind of broad, kind of limited, but no argument with that at all. Ribbon, there we go. So ribbon, let's assign this to the obvious one, which will be filter 1 frequency cutoff. And we'll set that to... We'll go a little less. And hear how that gives us a really nice feel compared to either automation or to applying some kind of other LFO. Because it's now a human performance, not only in timing, but in the variation. Over here we can choose whether that is bipolar or unipolar. You've got a spring back, so it can spring back instantly. So I can become my own human sample and hold. Or you can set a time. They're all related to notes, which, fair enough, I wish there was an option. But as not a primetime instrument, as in it's not Predator 4 or something like that, then okay, we will go with that. You can set a value, and there's a reasonable amount of options there that... And quantizing. Okay, this one. Let's change that springtime. Okay. So that puts a number of steps into however many. It sets your time and then divides that by X. So rather than swinging back smoothly, it quantizes that. Okay, pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Wouldn't be entirely bad to have a bit more control. The frustration you might face is, okay, how am I going to go in a performance, because you've got to use the mouse. And while you could say, okay, I'll play all my notes in with both hands even, and then come back and ping, 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 I don't think it's going to give you the same togetherness of as a single performance. And then is that going to be recorded as MIDI, or are we just going to record that as audio? Neither is right nor wrong. That's just part of what you'll need to come to terms with. But this does seem like the whole thing, like the springback and everything, almost seems quantized to some sort of value. Now it's not. So that becomes like a complete performance. Should be interesting. Is ribbon controller a target? Probably not. It might be. Doesn't look obvious there. I wouldn't expect it to be. It's just whether you could use your mod wheel. That would seem a little odd to use one thing to something else. But having the option of this ribbon controller, while not the same as a real tactile ribbon controller, especially one that had multiple points where you could put your fingers all over it, I think is a nice thing and opens up possibilities we would not expect from this. So really very, very cool. Oh, the ARP. I did say we would look a little at the ARP. Let's put ourselves into ARP mode. Oh, I've been in ARP mode for a bit, so that may have been controlling some of what happened. Let's just put this back into a more let's turn him off. Let's turn this. Okay, that is an awfully short sound. That'll be here. And let's turn these off as well. And our white noise. So ARP. Oh, okay, when you press ARP on, it turns. There are a few things in here where you press one thing and it makes an expected alteration. Probably far more cool than not. So I press one note, it just cycles through whatever's here. I haven't got any tunings. Right, speed, yeah, see this is one of those ones that kind of annoys me, but it is how it is. If we go to... So let's go. I've got two notes down, so it's playing first note, second note. If I set this to be different values, which can seem a little dramatic, but again, let's see what happens. Yeah, if I press shift, it becomes a lot more sort of thing. So let's pull this back to 8 steps. That's with one note down. So notes an octave apart, you can hear it moving and yet being constrained to the initial octave choice. So if I played a C major chord, if I reset each of these, and this is where they annoy me, they all do this. the expected arpeggio. It's playing 3-2-1, 3-2-1, which is not entirely what I would expect. Oh, now it's playing up. What it's actually doing does make sense. It's taking the notes in the order in which they were played. Some sequencers always did this, or arpeggiators always did this. Oh, I heard that note first, I'll go with it first. So if you're playing from your sequencer, it'll generally choose low, mid, high, but you can program it to go in any order you want. Which is cool. That reminds me awfully of, I don't know, a cartoon or something. You can then control whether it goes through its cycle and then moves by an octave. You can change on the fly, apparently. I see. It's not got a visual thing, but starting at 7, so it's only offering me steps 7 and 8. Interesting. Oh yes, there is a little dot. Okay, I can turn off. So they're playing but not playing, if you know what I mean. Interesting. You've just got to get used to the vagaries of them. RTFM on the catch-ups. Let's turn those back on. There's the ability to ratchet. Again, it's funny that when we turn ARP on, it turns that on. When I turn one of these, it doesn't necessarily turn it on. But there's probably some logic to why that's the case. Okay, that changes the velocity of the ratchet. We're not particularly velocity sensitive here, so that's kind of cool. Again, you'd want to read the manual on these things. They do get a little complex and obtuse. Magic steps, I honestly didn't really get. You think there's going to be the menu there, but then there isn't. It seems to turn steps on and off. So let's put... Okay, so it's now set that step to +7 semitones. So it's just choosing from some reasonably safe values. That sounds really nice. We can try unisons. I guess it sounds good, but it's just not what I'd be looking for. I'd probably prefer to flange after my chorus, but so be it. There's no changeability. But for what they are on board, no argument. There's the ability to swing. It feels funky. It's nice. Key entry, RTFM on that. Latch should hold. Again, RTFM on those. You can slide and move things around. Smoothing is probably for this. I did say that there was this. So let's choose. It's not MIDI, oscillator, modulator, ARP, free. So we can take our ARP free. So that's smoothing these values by the sounds of it. Cool. That is really cool. This is where I don't do it much, but if I get something like that and I'm going, that works really well, that is going to end up in a piece. And that's when these step sequences, not really an arpeggiator, but that's when these kinds of step sequences come into their own. So while it's not the first thing I want to get into, it does do its job really beautifully. So, yes, going back to poly mode. Kind of a piano-y sort of sound, sort of cool. Bottom line, bit or Back in Time 2, I didn't play with number 1, so how much these things add, I can't say, but I should say a reasonable amount. If you've liked it but not felt quite there, obviously these add that little bit more, which maybe gets you there. If you haven't played with it, it's well worth a play. It's well, it's more than Reason Subtractor because it's got a bigger architecture, but if you approached it like Reason Subtractor and say, here is a basic synth, a lot of people in the old days did it with Synth 1, I'm going to learn everything I can get out of this. This has a lot that you can do, and you can range from quite modern, Dory, VST type sounds right back into early simple modular sounds. And by simple, I don't mean the sounds are simple. I just mean not, Tonto, 12 walls of 47 trillion modules, but like a System 100 or an MS-20 or something like that. It's got a real charm to its sound. And that's what they say they've focused on, and I think they've delivered it quite well. Does it compare to having a real analog in your studio? Who gives a flying banana peel? Because your audience don't know, and nor do they care. Yes, some idiot in a group or forum will probably wave their finger at you, but go and have a look at what they've done. And maybe they have some doorless jams, but they probably don't have an album for sale on Bandcamp, let alone any kind of body of work, in which case, right, dude, Monday's expert. So go your own path. If you're looking for something that, without weighing you down too much, puts you anywhere from that MS-20, System 100 through well, I don't know how it would compare in terms of architecture, but through, say, like an Alesis Andromeda that works, then I think that Bit 2 is a serious contender, with the advantage, from my perspective, of not being a clone, whether successful or failed, of a particular instrument. I'm never super keen on those for my own work. Yes, I very much liked Tal's Jupiter 8, but if it came down to between Tal's Jupiter 8 and this, I would get this. Not because I don't like what Tal's done, I like what Tal's done, but this is just a far more, well, it's a wide open road within its own limits, which are far further out than you initially think. So, bottom line for me, a real winner of an instrument that is what one would hope for from Rob Papen, who is known as being a kind of a master of synthesis. And we know that he was doing this in about 1982 because that's when his first, well, what I know of is his first record with Nova came out. So he's got the credible history, but more importantly, he's got the credible proof that while not all the functionality of a Predator, it does seem that they've focused on the how do we deliver some of the usability, the results that one might get from that sort of era or style of gear, moving from, as I say, MS-20, System 100, through to Prophet 5s, Jupiter 8s, that sort of broad sense of, you know, we'll have some of this, we'll have some of that, without it sounding like, well, a faceplant. It's a really nice instrument with an awful lot going for it. So, yeah, really, really good. There was one more thing that I did want to go through with you. Let's turn that off for the moment. Let's turn all these effects off for the moment. Let's just make our sound a little bit more. Alright, happy with that as a sound. Now let's look at how is this going to behave with external effects. This is actually an important thing and I shouldn't have forgotten it to now. Hertz delay, free on high hertz side. I think sounds fabulous. Especially in a very sort of 1974, 1978 kind of mold. I think they go together superbly. So let's turn actual routine back on. And now let's look at multiplier. Let's turn him on. Again, free on higherhertz.com. He's doing reverb duties here. Really, really nice sound as far as I'm concerned. Let's pull. Multi-voice chorus of sorts. this into a reverb. Let's just pull this one out so we... So similar to a spring or a tanky reverb that might be built into one of those early instruments. It takes external effects very, very nicely. To me, that's super important. There's nothing worse than having an instrument that doesn't take effects nicely, because then it's unmixable. Benedict for high hertz, obviously there are the multiplier and hertz delay as well. If you want to ask questions, please, not about support for Rob Papen or how to buy it or how to steal it or any of that kind of stuff, ask on down below. Preferably ask after hitting subscribe, because that helps us to keep going with this. It helps the algorithm to see us as being valuable and all of that. But most importantly, get out there, play with it. This is a demo mode, obviously. No limits or problems with regards to demoing the instrument. Spend some time, play with it. If you find that you're just as excited after hours or days, then you've probably got yourself a real winner. I am excited every time I play with it, which makes me think, yep, this is the way to go. So get out there, have fun. Go, have a life.